To this training for DNA collections for us. Really appreciate your ability to get online with me this morning. So I'm going to go through these slides, hopefully. Let's see. There we go. So just a really brief DNA Solutions overview, talk about our services, and then the collection process, and a little bit of genetics in there.
Okay.
So DNA Solutions, established in 2000. We are accredited by the American Association of Blood Banks for relationship testing, which, as you'll see, includes a lot of different possible scenarios, including immigration. It's very important if you're going to do any kind of immigration work that you follow the protocols that AABB has outlined, because our State Department kind of requires that. So we are also accredited to the ISO 17025 standard. We perform genetic analysis, and our goal or our mission is to bring emerging DNA technology to the commercial marketplace to improve the quality of life. There will be people who come into your facility. Maybe they're not there for a DNA test to begin with, but they may start asking questions once you indicate that you do provide DNA testing services for other things. We get a lot of requests for ancestry, and then there's more interest in personalized medicine and specific testing for BRCA and several other types of things. Right now, we don't provide a lot of medical diagnostic testing. We do have a test for sickle cell trait, but other than that, we're looking into the opportunities to do some other things. So if you ever have someone who comes in and asks a question about some form of DNA testing, just give us a call. Even while they're there, just call up and find out where we are in the process or if we can do that, because that's going to bring revenue to your business, and it will also improve our services that we provide.
Okay.
The AABB accreditation assures the highest standards for both cation pair and compliance and operations, so that we always get the right answer. That's one of the things when I started this company. As a scientist, I knew that I would be able to generate quality data, but the part I hadn't anticipated was how that information, when it's relayed back to the individuals, affects their lives as well as the lives of people around them, like potential grandparents and aunts and uncles. So it was real important to understand that through this accreditation process, we can be assured we're at least providing the accurate information. Whether it's what they expect to hear or not, that's where the whole part about customer service on your end comes into play, and dealing with people who thought they were the parent and are determined not to be, or people that were hoping they weren't the parents and having to tell them that this guy or this person is the father or the grandfather. And that's one thing we never really are sure when they come in for the testing, what it is they're trying to answer. They just want to know if they are the father, whether they're trying to get out of child support or they are hoping that they are. So it's an interesting area, and I'm sure you're aware that you affect people's lives every day with this type of analysis.
Right.
And the ISO accreditation as well, and New York State has their own requirements, and we have completed the testing and proficiency for them, so we are allowed to do and process samples for the state of New York. So DNA Solutions provides testing in paternity relationships in humans. We also have a large market in which we work in animals. And you may get an opportunity, someone comes in and says, I have this meat that I'm not sure it's beef or if it's deer or something, really strange questions. But we can answer a lot of that through the DNA testing that we do in animals. We run a registry for North American white-tailed deer breeders. We do forensic identification in humans and animals. You may have private investigators that you can talk to and tell them that you have a source now that they can go through you to get forensic testing done. if they've got a discarded cup and they want to find out, if this profile is a male or a female, or we've done licked envelopes from letters that were left that were threatening letters. We can get a DNA profile from that. All kinds of different opportunities to do DNA analysis on samples that would be potentially used in forensic identification. And we do research and development to bring online new services and products. The genetic testing that you will provide, we hope, will be used to provide peace of mind. When people come in and they have a doubt, they have a question, am I really that person's child, if it's an older individual? People that have been adopted, trying to find their true biological parents. People that are just have been told that they are the father of this child and they're just not sure. Hopefully through the accreditations and the confidence in the lab, you can convey that confidence to the individuals coming in, give them the assurances that they're going to get an answer and that it's all confidential. We follow strict guidelines, not releasing this information to anybody other than who's authorized to receive it. And finally, we say that we're providing the truth. Sometimes that can be hard to hear. The individual identity that we provide once we get a sample from an individual or off of a cup or a contact article, we use for grandparentage analysis, SIB-SHIP analysis, paternity testing, criminal investigations. We've done some types of mass disaster type of analyses when a plane goes down and they need to make sure they can identify all the people that were there and nobody on the ground was hurt or there wasn't somebody unaccounted for on the plane. And we provide a very high power of discrimination with the analysis that we do. That is the ability to uniquely identify individuals. The only place that this comes into question is if we're dealing with identical twins. And we have had an individual, a woman came by and said that she had slept with these two gentlemen within a short time period of each other and wanted to find out who was the true father of the baby, but they were identical twins, the men were. So we told her that we would be unable to determine, based solely on the DNA analysis, who was the father of the child. Testing markets, as I've mentioned some of these, the child support enforcement. We do work for probate, in which an individual passes away, has a large estate, and somebody shows up and says, oh, I'm the long-lost son or daughter, I should get half their stuff. So probate's a good place to use this. Adoptions, trying to match up parents and children. Or the other side is that the adopting agency needs to make sure that the correct father has given up parental rights, because it can be a big mess if an adoption goes through and then the true biological father shows up and says, I didn't know that I had a child, I didn't give you permission to adopt him out. They will often award custody to the original biological parent even after the adoption. So those people have bonded with this child and everything, and now the child is taken away. So it's important to get the right biological father to relinquish parental rights in an adoption case. Immigration, missing persons, product tampering, and private investigations, as I mentioned. We also provide a service, it's basically, we call it our infidelity testing, when individuals believe that their significant other is cheating on them, either their husband or their wife, and they find a semen stain, they believe, on an article of clothing or bedding or in a car or wherever, and they don't believe that there's any chance that it's theirs. They can collect a sample and send it in for us to first identify whether it's semen, and then second to do a DNA profile on it to find out who it matches.
Wow.
But on your end, what you need to provide these services and do DNA collections is a point person, obviously, and that's hopefully who we're training today. A place to store our DNA collection kits, because we will provide those to you. A place to file copies of documents that the individuals will provide. Some way of producing a picture of the individuals that are being collected, the samples are collected from, and obviously a copier and a printer if you're using a digital camera to print out a picture from the individual. So I'll kind of go through a scenario on how we see this plays out in most cases. So a customer calls or walks in the door. The first question is, what type of service are they looking for? A lot of them are going to be paternity testing, but not all. And they don't necessarily know that if they actually need a grandparentage test, they may say they need a paternity test. They just kind of lump all of that type of DNA testing into one term. So you have to ask the question, exactly what relationship are you trying to prove? And that way you'll make sure that you're getting the right testing done and the right people are being sampled. So if you have any questions at that point, if somebody comes in and says, well, I'm third cousin on the mother's brother's side and I need to find out if I'm related to this third cousin on the nephew niece's side, and so it can be very complex, and a lot of the relationships that people might ask for are too distant for us to actually develop a DNA profile that will provide statistical evidence for that relationship. So you just have to ask the questions, not assume that when they come in and say, I need a paternity test, that that's exactly what they're looking for. Then we do have two types of collections. There are the legal court admissible collections, in which all of the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, all the signatures, the samples are sealed. All of that process is done correctly. And then there's people who are coming in, they just want to know for their own information. They don't want to stir the pot. They don't want everybody to come in and get their photos taken. They want to bring in a chew toy from the baby, or a pacifier, or some contact article so that the mother doesn't know that they're actually testing, because she is certain he's the dad, but he has a little bit of doubt and doesn't want to stir the pot, so he says, I'm just going to find out, take this pacifier in my sample and see if I am the dad. Now, the main thing is to let them know that if they turn out they're not the father, they would have to do it all over again if they're going to submit this for relinquishing or getting out of child support or doing any kind of legal thing. So we always try and sell the legal test. And that way also there's nobody later on going to be surprised that a test was done without their knowledge. That can be a very uncomfortable situation as well. So we always try and sell the legal test, and we obviously charge more for the legal test because there's more paperwork and documentation and steps involved. So it's better revenue if you can get the legal test versus the non-legal test. But there are some people that they really don't want to try and cause any problems. If they turn out to be the father, then they just move on. And there's never, the other party never knows there was a question in their mind. So I'm going to talk about collections for the legal court admissible paternity test. That's the most important, where you're collecting all of this information in a manner that if it should go to court, and it's pretty rare that these things actually do end up in which you have to sign an affidavit or even show up in court to say you did collect these samples from these individuals. If all of the documentation is present, when we send, if we're requested to appear in court, the first thing we will ask is, can we just send you our packet of information showing that we've documented all of the procedures and everything, and accept that as us being there, basically. Because nobody wants to pay to have me come and testify because it's expensive. And so as long as everything is in the case file, we can send that to the court, and most of the time that's sufficient. So court admissible paternity tests. Obviously, you review with the customer, make sure that you understand the question they're trying to have answered, that you will review all the legal documents. If they have a court order that they have to have this paternity test done for child enforcement or something like that. You'll take photos of the individuals being collected, make copies of their government-issued IDs or hospital documents, fill out completely the collection envelopes, one at a time, one sample per person, and you should never have two open at the same time. Collect the DNA samples, again, one at a time, sign and date everything, so that's sort of a standard that indicates that you attest that you're the one that collected and sealed this up, and the dates are accurate. Complete the client information form and mail it back to the lab. So as an agent for doing these tests, you are responsible for all of those steps that occur in your facility and the training of the people that are going to do this, if it's not you. So again, review with the customer, take their payment. One party may say that the other person is going to pay for it and they're coming in later. So in those cases, you get all of the contact information you can for that person and then hold everything until the other person comes in and pays for it. You don't want to send anything to the lab without it already being paid on your end as well.
Right.
So sometimes the mom and the child will come in, then the alleged father is going to come in later. They really aren't getting along, so they don't want to be in the same place at the same time. So make sure you get contact information on everybody that's involved. So to make a collection, the most important thing is to assure yourself through the documentation that this is the correct person who came in the door. Again, if the father's not even there, who knows, this lady that comes in says that she's being tested for this particular case, but you don't know, it could be the neighbor's lady and her baby or something like that. So the whole process is designed to make sure that you have assured yourself through the documentation that this is the right person that's being tested. So they really need a government-issued ID, not something that they may have, contrived or made, laminated some kind of ID or something from their office or something like that. But a driver's license or passport is generally the best way to go for adults. Military ID will work, but it's, I guess in many states it's illegal to do a photocopy of a military ID. So you can write on your paperwork that military ID was used and that you validated that it was that individual whose picture was there who came in your office. Children can be a little bit more difficult, especially if they're just a day old or something like that. They should have some kind of documentation from the hospital, though, that indicates the child's name, and basically the mother will be on there. Many times the alleged father won't be on there. They may already have a Social Security card if they're several months old, but more importantly, to get a clear photograph. That way you can have that, and if the mother is holding the baby, that's always a good thing. Sometimes they're asleep in a bassinet or something, and it's just as easy to take a picture of them. So at least you've documented, and with those pictures you will have the consenting adult sign and date that picture, which is basically proof that they acknowledge that that is the child who is collected. And then, of course, if the father's there, he can sign it as well. So that's always a good thing. So identification is important. And they may say they don't have anything for the child. And it's important to make sure that sort of the age of the individual coming in makes sense, because if the alleged father says, yes, we had this baby 3 months ago, and the mother brings in some toddler who's actually walking, then they say they don't have ID for it. You say, wait, this doesn't match. I'm supposed to see a 3-month-old, and you're bringing in some child who's walking, so they're probably closer to a year. There will be chances that a woman is trying to perpetrate a fraud, that she either doesn't want this guy to be the dad, and so she's trying to set up a scenario where she knows he's not going to match the child. And it's up to us to make sure that the correct individuals are tested. That's another reason, and I'll say shortly, why it's so important to get the mother tested as well, especially if she's there. So I'll talk about that. Keys to success, basically the next step, once samples are collected, that we have consent from proper legal guardian. Sometimes a guy will bring a baby in, and say, yes, I need to have this legal test done, you have to make sure that he is a legal guardian. If he's not on the birth certificate and he's just kind of gets visitation with this child, he may not have any legal standing at all. So if he signs as legal guardian, then it won't hold up in court. The mother will say that, well, he's not a legal, he didn't have the rights to do that. So you just have to ask and make sure that the people that are signing for minor children are legal guardians. And they can be sometimes the workers who work with DHS and child support enforcement, sometimes they have legal guardianship of the child. The grandparents may have legal guardianship of the child. So it's just important to make sure you have the right person signing the legal guardianship statement that they give permission to do this testing. Accurate identification. And again, we prefer the alleged father, the mother, and the child. So why test the mother? And as I mentioned, if a mother is bringing in a child that she knows is not going to match the alleged father, it's likely that this child may be from someone, a friend of hers who has one of about the right age. Then if the mother is tested along with the child, she's not going to match the child. And so you can catch it right there and say, well, the mother brought in somebody who was not her own biological child. So there's a possibility that the true father is a brother. Then we have issues, and the power of discrimination goes down when you're dealing with close relatives. And it's important to have the mother so we don't falsely include brother as the possible father. And you can always ask that when you're setting up the paternity test, that is there a chance that there's a brother that may be the father. And that the statistical determination between a child and an alleged father possibly can come back inconclusive, that there's not enough statistical strength in the analysis. We actually have a series of 20 markers that we can run, and so far I have not had any inconclusive results with the 20 markers, but it is possible. So we will provide collection kits for you, and they'll come in a little pouch, and you'll have documents there. We will also send, if you haven't already received the documents by PDF, I think we do that. And so you'll get 4 buccal swabs, you'll get 4 envelopes, and also in there is sort of a little checklist that you can run through to make sure that you've got everything and you're doing signing and sending back all the right information. Very simple sort of how-to on the inside of that trifold. It just takes you through the steps of the collection. Again, just a picture of what's in the kit. You have a child, alleged father, or mother. There's an additional tested party if you've got a grandparent, or if you're doing another alleged father. Sometimes there are 2 guys who are possible, and they want to go ahead and get them both done. So you can do that. You can also line through and write any other relationship on top of one of those envelopes, as long as it's clearly marked. And we know what's coming in that particular envelope. So beginning the process, after you've established what type of testing the individual needs, you'll begin by filling in the collection envelope. So on the child's envelope shown here, you simply have the client's name, which is going to be the child's name in this case, their date of birth, and again, this is all to help you identify, again, if it's supposed to be a 3-month-old and they come walking in and it's not the right aged individual, whether it's a male or a female, and then the race of the individual. And this is important mainly for the alleged father, but it's also nice to have what's expected for the child and the mother. But we have actually 4 choices, so 5 choices: African, Asian, Caucasian, Hispanic, and Native American. We need to have one of those circled. And sometimes they're mixed race, so they can say whether they are a mixture, but we need to have one of those 5 circled because the statistical databases that we have fit into those 5 categories. So, and it's all just kind of what they claim to be, we don't have any way of verifying if someone walks in and they look Caucasian but they say they're black or Hispanic, or they look Hispanic and they say they're Native American. So it's based on what they believe they are. It's not going to change the final result as whether they're the father or not the father, but it will change slightly the statistical evaluation. An alleged father, same type of thing. I didn't point out at the bottom of the front of the envelope is where they sign the consent and release statement. So that needs to be done on every envelope, either on an alleged father, hopefully they're adults. If they're not an adult, then they have to have their legal guardian sign it. So the mother of a boy who's 16 who has potentially a baby, if they're not emancipated, they need to have their parent sign, and you have to verify the parent's identification. And then the back of the envelope does have a place for address and email. If you're doing this case yourself and we're going to send results back to you, we don't actually have to have that information. And if you have a form that they will fill out with all their contact information of your own that goes in the case file at your place, that's fine. You can have them fill this out. We're not going to mail it to them if it's your client. We're going to send you the results, and then you'll provide that to your client. Collecting the DNA. It's pretty straightforward. It only takes a minute, really, once everything is prepared. So you'll put on some gloves, because the main thing we don't want is any type of contamination from the collector. You will open one of the buccal swab packages by peeling the top. There's two ends to the buccal swab. One has the tip on it. The other is just the stick end. The stick end will have a separation in the envelope so that you can get hold of these two little tabs and pull it open. And you only need to expose the very end of the swab, the handle. So then you pull the swab out of the sleeve and you rub up and down on the inside of the mouth of the individual. What I like to do is I put my free hand on the outside on their cheek, and then I use a little bit of pressure. I kind of bend the plastic stick a little bit as I rub up and down on the left side, and then I swing around to the right-hand side. I do both sides of the cheek with this one swab. I'll rotate the swab a little bit so that it gets good contact on all sides. And basically, about 5 seconds, slow strokes up and down on each side is usually more than enough for us to do our DNA testing. Then the swab goes back into the sleeve you just pulled it out of. That's why I don't tell you to open that package all the way up, to just expose the stick of the swab so you can slide the swab back into that envelope, and then that goes into the envelope that you filled out their information on. And as I said, you only want to have one of these open at a time. You should, when you're collecting the sample for the child, you should only see the child's envelope and the child's swab that you're prepared to use. Collect it, put the swab back into the sleeve, put the sleeve in the child's envelope, and seal it up. We have laboratories that have sent us samples in which the child and the mother's samples were swapped. And in some cases, the child was a male, so we can see immediately when we develop our profile that this mother comes back a male profile. And we'll say there's a problem here. Then they have to recollect the individuals. So that's a bad thing. So you want to make sure you're only doing one at a time, so there's no chance that you're going to put the mother's swab inside the child's envelope or vice versa. So as I mentioned on this slide, the conditions of the client's mouth might affect the recovery of DNA. First of all, we don't want to have any foreign material in their mouth. We would like to not have the mother have breastfed the baby within the last 15 to 30 minutes. There is a chance that the child, we could see a bit of a mixture profile if the baby has mother's breast milk in its mouth. No candy, food, gum, or tobacco. they can just simply spit it out. We have seen very stained swabs where a child may have had a candy in its mouth. As long as it's been taken out, we can still get good DNA profile from that stained swab. Babies are the easiest to get samples from. They seem to slough a lot of cells quickly. The harder people are the old people. We had an 80-year-old guy in here that we eventually had to actually stick his finger because we could not get DNA profile from any cells from his mouth. And it just over time, I imagine if he may have been a smoker and drank a lot, then the inside of his mouth is like leather, and we just weren't getting a good sample. So you have to work a little harder on older people, like especially grandparents. You might rub a little bit more. But it's really rare that we would have to call you and say we couldn't get anything from a particular swab and you're going to have to recollect. We've only had a few in the thousands that we've done. Again, after the collection, you're going to slide the swab back into the container or the sleeve it came out of, complete each sample before moving to the next person. I guess you can tell I'm kind of harping on that because it's just not good to swap things or mix things up. It makes it really difficult. So then once you have the envelope filled out and the swab is placed back into the envelope, you have to seal the envelope. We will provide evidence tape that you can put across the sealed, the part that you've closed, closed the enclosure. Then you need to initial and date across the seal. That's more proof of the tamper evidence that when you collected it, it was sealed, not later. And you can have the client also initial and date the seal. So when, if it ever goes to court, they can't say, oh no, I didn't see them put it into the envelope and they took it behind the closed doors and changed it and it's not really mine. And so they can cry a lot of things, but if you've got this sealed, initialed, and dated by you and the individual, there's no question. So they can never come back and say it wasn't done correctly. Now, if for some reason you have trouble with evidence tape and it gets broken all accidentally, or you have more samples than you have tape for some reason, you can make your own seal. You can use clear tape, you can use some other type of tape. Just make sure it covers the enclosed, the place that you've closed the envelope, and that you initial and date it, just like you would regular evidence seal. Because if somebody tries to tamper with that and peel it off, it's going to be pretty obvious. So the other thing is to make sure that the customer and the collector initial and date the photographs. So you're going to take pictures of the individuals. It can be one picture with all three people in it. It can be 3 individual pictures, however you'd like to do it. But get a picture and then have them initial and date it. Because, again, if it goes to court and they say, no, I was never there, and you go, well, here's a picture of you, and it's initial and dated by you in my presence, then there's no question. But the whole process of this legal collection is to make sure that if it ever goes to court, all the things are covered, and that there's no question of who was copied, who was. On the nation and the chain of custody form, the collector fills in and verifies information. It's surprising to me that a lot of collectors don't ask people how they spell their names, that they just hear Julio and they just try and put in what they think is the correct spelling of the person's name. We have a lot of these forms, client information forms, that have the individuals. So it would be best if you've got their IDs there to see how they spell their name and write it on the form. Sign the collector will sign the client information form. There's a space on there that says, I collected these things and they've been in my custody and I haven't tampered with them in any way. And then you get ready to mail it out, by the FedEx mailing labels, then initial and date the chain of custody at the very bottom of the form. So this is what the form looks like, and hopefully you'll have them. As I said, there's a place, the third line down is where the signature of the collector goes, the names of the individuals, whether it's a legal test, whether there'll be on the forms there's actually a space there for immigration. And the very bottom is the chain of custody. Relinquished by collector. And the collector will sign that. And then they'll put the date and time and then circle whether it's FedEx or if there's some other means that they're mailing it to us. Then when we get it, we will say it's relinquished by the carrier, and our laboratory will sign the final samples received by or relinquished to. So that's the chain of custody part. The collector will sign in the box relinquished by. Photos. So make a set of copies for your files for all of the information you're sending. May need to hold the information until alleged father submits his sample if they don't all come together. And make sure to get contacts, cell phone numbers, and any and all ways to get in touch with people. Some of these people tend to move around fairly quickly, so it can be difficult to track them down if there's questions. There's a checklist, and that's also in Kit. So you make sure you've nailed all of these things on the checklist. Issues. These are probably the more common issues that we see, that not all the documents have the signatures and are dated. So just make sure that the samples are sealed, initialed, and dated by the collector and the client. The pictures are initialed and dated by the collector and the client. Again, it's all in anticipation of having to go to court. Because if it's all done, there's no question. If for some reason you don't have initial and date on something, or one of the samples wasn't sealed properly, the client, and if they have a lawyer, they may actually say, oh look, this wasn't done properly, so we'll throw it out. And that would not reflect well on you or on us. Documentation, just make sure that you've got proof of who they are. And the last one on here is called error correction. In the legal system, there is only one way to correct a written error. They don't ever want to see whiteout or big black markers that are obliterating what was written incorrectly. The only acceptable error correction is simply a single line through whatever was incorrect that is then initialed and dated, and then the correct information written there, right over it or under it or beside it, but no obliterations, no whiteout, nothing to actually hide what the mistake was. In the legal industry, that is just a no-no. They assume that you're hiding something of importance rather than you just put the wrong date there. So if you write the wrong date, you put one line through it, and then you write the correct date and you initial and date it. So it's actually there twice. Best common practices. Why are we doing all of this in this manner? Is to protect the collector and the client. So the alleged father knows that if he wasn't there when the mother and child were collected, at least he knows that it was done correctly. And the courts as well. Ensure a positive experience for the people and get faster results, because then we don't have questions if there's a mix-up. How do you make sure that this all happens? By asking questions. You can't ask too many questions. Are we doing the right test? Is this the right person who was collected? All of this type of thing. Obtain clear photographs and copies of identification. So those are all the ways that we feel that if you follow all these instructions, then you will get the best information back in the quickest period of time and provide the best service for your customers. Again, the checklist, I don't think I need to go through that. I've hit that pretty hard. So this would be obviously problems with collections. The picture on the left is a government ID it's really difficult to even. The other one is simply my work ID, not a government-issued ID. If you want, I mean, you can collect that information, but you still need to have government ID. And then these are types of pictures that I see regularly. The first one, there's dark. The second one, up right-hand corner, the background was too bright. And it really surprises me in the digital that someone would take a look at the picture they just took on the camera and think that that would be okay to identify somebody. If it's all blurry, if it's black, take another picture. So we just want a clear picture. That's the bottom line. And again, I see over and over again things that I would not consider adequate. People that are using cameras. There's a limited focal distance on a Polaroid camera of about 3 feet. And yet people will get it right in front of a child, infant, in a bassinet, take a picture. And then they send that in, and it's just this blurry blob. No way I can tell who that is. Again, no obliteration, proper error correction, and everything is dated. You just can't. So, let's go ahead and initial and date. If you have any questions, just call us and we'll help you through it. The last thing I wanted to touch on was what type of relationships can we test? Because as I mentioned at the beginning, if you're a fourth cousin twice removed on your mother-brother side, there's really no type of DNA test that directly will tell you what your relationship is to somebody farther away. But on this family tree picture, and we'll actually send you a card that has this on it so that you can see all of the people on this picture are ones that we can test. You can be a grandmother, a grandpa, you can be aunts or uncles, you can be children, you can be mothers and fathers. But we can't do great-grandparents without something in between. We can do aunts and uncles. We can do siblings. So as I said, we'll send you that picture so that you will have it, and if somebody comes in and you can say, okay, show me which relationships you want to test, and they got to be on that picture. One thing that we've had before is an individual comes in, let me go back to that. We have the mother sample and we have one of the children, and they say, well, I want to do a grandparentage test. We go, okay, that's great for if you're missing the alleged father, we can test his parents and determine whether it's possible and what the likelihood that those grandparents had a child who is the actual father of that child. Well, then they come back and they say, well, I'm going to use the mother's grandmother. That's not going to help at all. They've got the wrong grandparent who's willing to participate. We would have to have the father's grandparents. So if you can point to, on this chart, the people or circle them or do something so that they understand who's being tested, then that'll work perfectly. There are some other tests. There's a Y chromosome test and a mitochondrial test that can be used to basically determine the possibility that somebody is a relative that's further away on the family tree. But they have to meet very specific criteria. For a Y chromosome test, there has to be a male lineage direct connection between the two people that are being tested. And if they don't have a family tree that shows that this person, his father's father, was also had another brother who was the father of this guy who had a son, so they're all connected through male lineage, then the Y test isn't going to work. And it's the same thing on a mitochondrial analysis, that you can do that to establish maternal lineage, but it's not a unique identification. So it's not going to tell you with absolute certainty the way that paternity testing can, that this person is the father of that child. But sometimes they just want to know if they share a common male ancestor, like they might have the same grandfather. So if they have male lineages connect them, they can use a Y chromosome test. And I can provide more information about that at another time. If you end up needing more information about mitochondrial or Y chromosome testing, we'll be happy to present a little bit more thorough webinar that can actually go through how that works.